Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
Brian, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Great to be with you, Owen. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the genesis of the Aussie Broadband business, how it all comes together behind the scenes, what it takes to provide this connection between you and me. I'm making the assumption that you're running on an Aussie Broadband connection. I definitely am. So we're gonna test that out today and see how good it really is. But I've been a loyal customer for a very long time, both personally and any business that I run, and a huge advocate of the brand, which sounds strange for me to say because it's an internet brand, but we're going to find out why that is the case and why so many customers are just like me. But I want to just launch straight into it. I want to ask you kind of about the story of Aussie Broadband. Can you explain the origin of the business and ultimately just like what led you and I here today to talk about this and having over 700,000 connections? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, it's a great story, Owen. I think it's a story of leadership, resilience, grit, some good fortune, and that's something all successful startups need. Last year was the 20th anniversary of the business, and we asked one of our former executives to write the history of the business. And we've got a book here that we've pulled together, which has got a lot of great stories. So some of them are probably not for broadcast, but they're there to read. As there's always great stories in these founder-led businesses. So the Aussie had two antecedent companies, essentially, Wideband and Westvic. The Wideband founders were Philip Britt and John Reisinger, who met through a mutual friend, and they had a shared passion for scouting, and it really was, a mum and dad land room startup story. And by December 2003, Phil and John had acquired a carrier license, which you need as a telco, and launched the company with a goal to service Eastern Victoria from Morwell via fixed wireless, and it's basically to service an area that would otherwise have been poorly underserviced by the existing players in the market. And that initial growth was fueled by some government incentives that were around at the time. It was aimed at increasing connectivity in regional Australia. And so they took advantage of those incentives to help fund some of the initial growth of the business. And sort of a parallel, almost at the same time, a gentleman by the name of Ian Watson and some of his associates were building a very similar business out of Warrnambool, doing exactly the same thing, but servicing Western Victoria. And they were also taking advantage of those government incentives. But they'd also got some seed capital from a gentleman by the name of Pat Green, who remains on the Aussie board today. So it's a great longevity story with Pat, who's now a director of a listed company. And although there had been some modest contact between Ian and Phil over the previous period through other businesses, they reconnected over an eBay auction for a router. They were both bidding on the same router for their networks, and they sort of connected through that, and then began to talk about how they could assist each other with information, advice, and some sharing infrastructure. And both businesses were growing and taking advantage of those incentives, but getting closer and closer to Melbourne and butting up against each other more often. And so it became pretty obvious to them fairly quickly that they were better together than as competitors. And so in 2008, the businesses merged under the name of Aussie Broadband, which had been selected by Ian Watson. And the reason he chose that was that it was first in the list of any list of providers. I think at one point there might have been another A in there, so we even put a dot before the Aussie to make it come first, definitely come first. And from there, the business took its first sensitive steps into interstate with a small acquisition in South Australia and also on a major contract to build regional towers. In 2009, the NBN was announced and all that government funding disappeared and the overbuild of the NBN over their areas started. So that was a really, really difficult time for the business and they had to halve the workforce. But Aussie said, well, let's play the NBN game and started to connect to some regional NBN POIs or points of interconnect, and we'll probably talk a bit more about what they are later. And secured its first location in metropolitan Melbourne. But the next few years were tough, and staff commented in that book I referred to that there wasn't much fun during that time, and it was also referred to as the doldrum periods. And I'm sure many of your listeners would know of the roller coaster of startup land. And then in about 2016, Phil attended a leadership course, and that really reinvigorated his enthusiasm for the business and gave him a new frame of thinking about the future. The business had about $19 million of revenue at that point, and Phil set the business a target of $100 million of revenue in 3 years. By November that year, ABB had connected to all 121 points of interconnect and had become a national player. That included brokering a deal with Telstra Wholesale, which enabled the business to scale as it grew. So it meant that it could increment up its capacity in backhaul, which we'll talk about as well, as the business grew, rather than having to buy over capacity and then grow into it. And that enabled it to grow sort of at a pace. And then interestingly, by 2019, almost exactly 3 years after he set the target, Aussie had achieved $100 million of revenue. And that's the sort of origins of the business and the pre-IPO world. And it's a good story. The book's a good read, and it's a really good story.
Thank you for the detail, and the fact that there is a book makes it really interesting, and the detail is important there. I love that idea that the reason Aussie is there is because it would be first in the list, but even putting the dot in front of it would make that index at the very top. So when someone's looking for a connection, they go, that's the first thing they see. And I think that's so powerful, right? Like Google.
Yeah, it's entrepreneurial thinking, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Because like Google search has basically made a $1 trillion business just out of getting the results to the top, right? So that makes a lot of sense. So you got involved in the business just before the IPO. Can you talk us through that? And something that really stood out to me, and I know a lot of investors on this show, has always been that the fact that you guys pushed so hard to get customers involved in the IPO. Can you talk us through that period?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I joined in October 2019. At that point, the business had not had a qualified accountant for 2 years. So there was a bit of tidy up to do to get ready for IPO, which was the attraction for me to come along. And actually, it was a career goal of mine to do an IPO. Having done one, I'm not sure why it was, but it was a really busy year trying to get the business ready for IPO because there was a lot to do, and we did push hard for the customer offer in particular, despite some reluctance from our bankers and advisors. It wasn't common to do, but our view was that both staff and customers were playing a really important role in getting the business to where it was and would continue into the future. And we wanted them to have the opportunity to share in the success of that story. If it was, as we assumed it was going to be a continued success. So we did push hard for it. The demand blew us away, and we sort of had a feeling it was coming. And we were actually really concerned that the registry's website wouldn't be able to cope with the applications because of the volume. And so one of our developers, one of our long-standing developers, David Barr, he designed a piece of software in front of the registry's website, which was like a lobby, a bit like the use for Ticketek and Ticketmaster. And what we did was we allowed people to pre-register in the lobby for a period, and then randomized the queue. So it wasn't first come, first serve. It was a genuinely anyone who is a customer and didn't know what time they came into the queue, they would have an equal chance of getting through the queue. And we had to close the queue within 75 minutes of the opening of the offer. The demand was that high. So, and we only had a limited amount of stock. There were $10 million of stock available for customers. So the enthusiasm of our customers to participate in the IPO was quite humbling. And unfortunately, we had to disappoint a lot because there was so much demand.
Wow!
So that was really important. And then with staff as well, there's the schemes available, tax efficient schemes available where you're allowed to gift shares to employees we can have some really favourable tax benefits. So every employee at the time was offered 1,000 shares as a gift, which we thought was really important to have all of the people, particularly those talking to our customers who have interest in the business, and would live and breathe the success of the company at the same time as delivering an outstanding service to customers.
I didn't know that that was the level of demand. That is incredible.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah,
And good on you for like putting up with any like, stiffness from the bankers to say, let's not do that. Just give it to us because we'll make more money from it. Like,
right.
Like
You're always trying to strike a balance, right? Between, we face, every time we raise equity, we have the same challenge with retail investors versus bankers and things like that. And we try to balance it, but again, you can't keep everybody happy, but we do try and balance the interests of all stakeholders in everything we do. And it's a real challenge.
Yeah, for sure. And to do it with like a national brand, because, those like the 1,000 super fans idea, Brian, of like having so many people around the country who not only use you, like I don't own shares, but I advocate for the brand because I think it's awesome. And then the ability for them to be owners is just like a whole nother level, right? I mean, I'm sure we'll come to that in a second, but I was interested in getting your take. Obviously, you're the CEO of Aussie Broadband, so it would make sense to ask you, for people that are just genuinely curious, this might be like a slightly more technical question, but feel free to take it at whatever level works for you, is basically, how does the internet work? And I don't mean you don't need to go into like the TCP IP layer and talk about packets and all this sort of stuff, but just generally, like you talk about things like points of interconnect, and you talk about like all these different, like we'll come to some of the tools and technology you guys have built in a second, but how does this message happen, and who are like the key players between you and me? Because I feel like you're a startup and there's a gorilla in the room called Telstra, and then the NBN comes along. Like, what does that all mean? How do you play in that space?
Yeah. It's and I'm a non-technical person, so as I said, I'm a bean counter by skill set. But at its core, if you think about the NBN, so the connectivity to the house or the property is normally referred to as the last mile, because literally there's a whole network that feeds into that last little bit that goes to the home. And we'll talk about residential principally, I think. And that's delivered predominantly in Australia by NBN fibre, copper, or wireless. But it could be, there are other networks. It could be optical, it could be Starlink via satellite, or 5G. And the technology, while the technology is important, the principle is largely the same, which is there's a signal transmitted via light, essentially through the fibre cable from the home, in both directions, from the home to what's called there's probably a node or something locally, but then that's like a stepping stone to take you to what they call the points of interconnect, or the POI. And there's 121 POIs across Australia, and that's an aggregation point essentially for all the data from all the properties coming into equipment there, and that's really the end of the NBN network. So in and of itself, that achieves nothing, because all it does is take the traffic to a point and doesn't connect it to the rest of the world. So that's where we come in as an RSP, or a retail service provider, and we're responsible for getting that traffic from the POI to the nearest data center in a capital city, and then from that point we're connecting into capital, so all capital cities together, and then to the globe through undersea cables, so we go via Singapore or LA. We're submitting traffic that way, and there's a whole heap of players in that, and so we. When we were first starting, we had none of that infrastructure. We were essentially renting that infrastructure from third parties. So I touched on earlier about the deal Phil arranged with Telstra Wholesale, which enabled us to buy increments of 10 gig links over time to gradually increment our capacity. So, in some ways you could say Telstra helped fuel Aussie's growth. But NBN is a mandate, a legislative mandate, to be completely independent of RSP. So it is not allowed to sell to residential properties. It can only wholesale to RSPs, and it's the RSP's job to market to residential properties. And so they must be neutral. They must offer the same terms, conditions, pricing to every player in the market. That's a great leveler for a small player. You don't have to go and negotiate because you've got, you don't have much volume. You don't have to negotiate pricing. It's mandated by legislation, and then you're paying the same wholesale price as Telstra. So that's a great leveler. And Phil often talks about, in some ways Aussie should never have been allowed to happen, but the industry, the combination of the industry wholesale framework, legislative framework, and the ability for Telstra and others to provide backhaul capability on a scalable manner enabled Aussie to grow. And so in the network, you've got a range of different things. You've got NBN, and you've actually got the router in the home, so you've got the NTD, or the terminating device, which is the box that NBN terminates into. Then there's a router on top of that, which creates the Wi-Fi in your home, and that's something the home owner buys. Then at the other end, you've got the COI, then you've got the data centers, undersea cables, optical equipment on the end of each cable, which is the thing that shoots the light through and then translate the data into transferable information. And you've got all those players who are potentially offering wholesale. So you've got Telstra, you've got Vocus, and then something else I'm sure we'll talk about is we've also then, as we got some scale, we built our own limited fibre network in capital cities around Australia, which meant we no longer had to buy those services from Telstra. We could provide them directly on our own infrastructure and network. And so that was a sort of later development for Aussie. So as I said, I'm not technical, but it's an interaction of a whole heap of players, and the RSP's job is to stitch all that together, offer the customer service at the front end, provide the reliable network, and just stitch it all together as a package.
So my question then is how is people listening to this or watching this, Brian, will know that when they connect to their router or their modem to the NBN, they plug it in and, excuse my French, but a whole lot of shit happens. You get stuck. The thing doesn't connect. It's slow. It's patchy. Why is Aussie, or how is Aussie able to provide such a better, not customer service, we'll come to that in a minute, but just how is it able to provide a better experience if it's kind of using the same parties involved? You mentioned your own fiber. Is that one of the things, or I'm always mystified by that?
Yeah, I mean the NBN infrastructure is the same for everyone. So essentially, whichever RSP user, you've got a problem with the NBN portion of the network, you would have that problem with whoever you're dealing with. What can improve that is how the service provider interacts with NBN and organises truck rolls or whatever it might be, and how much ownership the RSP takes over solving the problem and taking it to NBN and saying, you need to fix this. So there's that part. Then beyond that, there's your own network and how you get that traffic away from the NBN to the globe. And there's a lot of automation in that. There's a lot of what we call redundancy. So if you've got two paths for the data to go, and one has a problem, you can send the data the other way and solve that problem. So having a fully redundant network is very important, and that's how we designed our fibre network, is to have two paths for every piece of traffic. So if there is a problem, we can reroute. There's a range of different ways that can be done. The other thing is being, often it can be transparency. So it might be that we have the same problems as other providers, but we're much more open and transparent about when those problems arise, how they're going to be fixed, and how long they take to fix. And we often get a lot of feedback about that it's not that we don't have issues, because we all do. It's how we deal with the issue when it arises, and that actually gets a lot more customer loyalty, in my view, is that, and certainly from a personal perspective, the businesses I'm most loyal to are the ones where I've actually had an issue and I solved it really well, more so than those where I didn't have an issue at all. And so we're very we find that very important to be open, honest, transparent when there is an issue. But there's also, and we've done a lot of work on automatic fault identification. So often now we've got software running that's trying to find the slight problems or precursors to problems even in the network that we can fix before the consumer even knows they had a problem. And we've had instances that we've said, look, you may have experienced an outage or a problem. It's now been fixed, and they'll say, I had no idea I had an outage or a problem. But we're always trying to find new ways to be proactive rather than reactive But then if there is a problem, to be really, really open, transparent, and own our mistakes if they do exist when there is an issue.
I do actually notice that because I've got like the Aussie app, and I do actually notice that I'll get a random message, like I'll see it in like the morning, and it'll say overnight you might have experienced of like, I didn't know, I was asleep, that type of thing. Whereas I think like a lot of businesses could learn from that is, like even if something doesn't go wrong with that particular customer, making them aware, just as you said, builds transparency. And I always think that the best customers to deal with in our business, Brian, are the people that have an issue and they come to you with it, because it gives you the opportunity to turn that into something that's like emboldening for that person. And I find that that's just, I love doing that. Like if someone jumps, some people are probably listening to this who have jumped into our intercom and been like, hey, I got this problem. And it's me that's like dive straight in there because I just love dealing with that. So that's like a great thing. Obviously it's not efficient at scale, but
no, I want to try it. And the worst experience for us is customers who don't tell you they had a problem, they just leave.
Yeah.
So that's what you don't want to happen. You want to have the opportunity to fix a problem. So
yeah, definitely. So one of the things that is really well known with Aussie is I call up and within like, it seems like an instant, I'm on the phone to someone who is local, and I'm a Victorian myself. I'm in outer eastern Melbourne, and I know that you guys are in like the Gippsland region, but for folks geographically, what that is like further east, southeast of Melbourne is the part of town where that is. And it's like, we'll talk about this in a second, but like how important is that to you as a business? Like, I feel like that's a key defining feature. When all those other businesses were offshoring, you guys didn't do that.
No, in fact, I think we put on, during COVID, I think we put on 100 staff in 8 weeks because many of our competitors, the call centers were offline because they were overseas and shut down. In fact, we were fielding calls from competitors, customers who had problems and couldn't fix it, and we were doing our best to help them solve their problems. So that was an interesting time. But I mean, what it boils down to really is the customer being the heart of everything we do. And I think we prove that each and every day with our customer service. We take a bit of a different approach, certainly a different call center approach to most. Other than your call is being recorded statements, we don't provide scripts. We encourage our staff to be authentic and real, to find the right level with each customer to talk to. If the customer's formal, they can be more formal. If the customer's more down to earth, then they can relax a bit more and be a bit more down to earth and try and match the language. So that's really important, obviously within reason. And we encourage the staff to solve the problem on the first call. Individual staff members are not assessed on average handle time, which is the traditional call center metric. The manager of the call center is. So their job is to give as much tools as possible to the agents to solve the problems quickly, but we don't want the person dealing with the customer to feel under pressure to end the call early. So their job is to solve the problem in whatever time frame it takes to get that done. And so that's really important to us. Having our call centers onshore, being 100% Aussie, we think it adds a lot. We know our research into our customers is that it's not about accents. People don't necessarily want to speak to someone who sounds just like them. We've got lots of people with lots of different accents in our call center. But they want to speak with someone who understands the Australian experience. And so can talk at a level that goes, I know what's happening because I've experienced the same thing, or I understand how it works in our environment. So it's about the local knowledge more than, it's not about accents. I think it's a really important thing to say because people often think that's the issue. It isn't. It's about understanding the problem. So that's really important. We hear a lot about that. And then there's just the little things like we don't have, well, I'm not sure what we've got there. Well, I know we don't have whole music. We have dad jokes, things like, so it's about being as authentic as possible. And talk to the people as you like to be talked to, right? It's a human to human contact. It's not a human to machine contact.
I love that. I didn't know that it wasn't a script, but that totally makes sense. And I do know, because I've had the call a few times for various things, particularly for business connections, like when I've had to hook up in like offices or buildings. That's a pain in the backside for anyone that hasn't had to do that before. And so it's good to just speak with someone to make sure it all works. And it's brilliant. But then, like you said before, like, you know, you're an accountant. Doesn't that impact the unit economics? Like, how can, like, that's just one part of it, but it costs more, right?
It does. There's no getting away from that. It does, and it is a challenge. And you know, we look to find ways to automate without impacting on that personalised service. So things like the automatic fault identification is one thing where if we can just reduce the number of calls, then that will help with the unit economics. If we just get the costs per 1,000 customers or whatever down, calls per 1,000 customers down to a lower and lower number, without impacting the experience of those who do call, and we should be able to create economies of scale. So we work on that quite a lot. Other things we're doing at the moment is obviously looking what are the nature of those calls and what are the elements of those calls that where really the human on the end of the call is not really adding any value. For example, updating a credit card. How do we minimize and provide digital solutions for that in a way that the customer chooses the channel? So they choose which way to go, whether personal or digital. But if they so choose, it works really well, and it's much more efficient for them, and they don't have to sit, you know, in a queue for a couple of minutes, which is sort of what happens, you know, some of the time. The other part of the equation is, you know, economics is a two-way street. It's cost and it's revenue. You know, we're not the cheapest in the market. ABB brand's not the cheapest in the market, but we believe the trade-off between that value we provide when you do have an issue that you do need to solve it, and the price, we think we offer a really good value. You know, you may be aware we have actually launched another brand, which is Buddy, which is aimed at talking to a different part of the market, those that don't necessarily want the personalised service, but really are really more value conscious and want a lower price product, but are happy to sacrifice that one-on-one personalised service. So it's a digital service model, and it's only been going a few months, but you know, we're really excited about what opportunities that might bring in terms of a different cohort of customers that we can appeal to, and how do we lead the market in a similar way as we do with telephonics or in a digital sense.
That's really interesting. I remember I was thinking of my experience when I first called Aussie. I moved into my place in the middle of COVID, Brian. It's this older shack up in the hills of the Dandenong Ranges towards Yarra Valley. And we had this shonky old internet connection, and it was like, I think like something had happened. And I jumped on the phone to the Aussie rep, and he was like, well, we could probably organize for you to get fiber straight to the premises. But we just need you to make a commitment. And it was just like a little bit extra every month from my particular area. And I was like, well, I do, like, there's a smart TV in a few different rooms. There's multiple, you know, people working from home. There's streaming. There's all this other stuff going on. I'm like, why the heck wouldn't I do that? And for me, the ability to give someone a call and say, this is what my problem is, can you help me? And to actually have a solution, not just to be waiting for an hour. Like, that was something, and I think more people listening to this would be inclined to think, well, I'll just pay for a slightly better service, given that how much I use the darn internet connection. It makes sense. And I think that fuels a lot of the growth. But yeah, that idea of like a sub-brand beneath the main one is really interesting. Another thing that stands out with Aussie is this idea that you guys started regionally. You said like regionally, Vic, but also Northern Territory, like big focus there for a bit. Can you talk to us about whether that is a strategic advantage or disadvantage? And the reason I ask this question is, you know, you got like, Morwell's a lovely place in Victoria, but it's not the most talent, like rich area. Obviously Melbourne's like a city that's vastly bigger in terms of you to pull employees from, or technical talent, engineers. Like, I'm just what I'm thinking of. Take nothing away from Morwell or, you know, regional areas, absolutely. But how do you think about that?
Well, I mean, in essence, it's just our DNA. We were, as I talked at the start, we were born in Morwell and Warrnambool Bull. So we started from regional roots, and we believe passionately in regions and supporting local communities and the areas which we operate in. As we did get bigger, it did get more and more difficult because the talent there's plenty of talent in those regions, but you exhaust it pretty quickly just in terms of the absolute volume of people that are there. So just our growth meant we had to sort of expand it. So we've now got certainly from a residential business, we've got call centres in Morwell, in Dandenong, and in Perth. And so having multiple locations, certainly Perth helps us follow the sun in terms of supporting our customers for longer during the day, but also opens up new talent pools. But we would like to try and, as hopefully we grow and continue to grow, we would like to have more regional areas where we can bring employment to the region, and you get and it talks to earlier about we're trying to be grounded. It's about maintaining that grounding and being part of the community, and it gets harder to do that when you're in glass buildings in the middle of a CBD, although we do have those as well. So we've got these regional centres. They do open up pools of employment, particularly when you're talking about Morwell, for example. So Morwell has been dominated by the power and coal industries for many, many years, and that's obviously declining. And so we're really pleased to be able to be offering more and more opportunities for people who are displaced from those industries as well. So we think it's really important, and we talk to the government about this regularly as well, and they're very keen for us to continue doing that. So I don't think we necessarily think of it in terms of it being a strategic advantage as such, as more of it's who we are. We are born in the regions, and it's in our DNA. So and I think it's less and less so. I mean, people would probably say it's the wages are maybe cheaper in those areas, but that's no longer the case. We've got a national pay structure and those sorts of things, so it's not really anything about that. And we've got local universities there that we can attach talent to. And I think again in a post-COVID world, I think there's more and more people looking for trade change as well. So we'd actually hope to draw people out of metro into the regions to work as well. It's an interesting question, but as I say, the best answer I'm going is it's really just who we are.
It probably also keeps you away from the noise, right? Like I'm not far from Collins Street here in Melbourne, Brian, and I know how noisy that street can get for things like for meetings if you're a CEO and you're talking to investors and these types of things and different stakeholders. It's just constant, the ability to kind of focus on the business. We actually had a fellow on the podcast recently, Joe Aston, who is a really well-established author and from the AFR, and he said like the ability to self-regulate is so important. And it's really struck with me. It's like the ability to be in the communities that you're serving, to employ so many people in the whole Gippsland region, like Latrobe Valley, I think it is like a great thing. Like Perth, Warrnambool, that's I almost think of that as like a very strong competitive advantage. And I think of it like, if you want that quintessential example, just look at like the mighty Warren Buffett over there in Omaha, Nebraska, like as someone who had that clarity of thinking, or has the clarity of thinking when he could have been on Wall Street or something like that. But I wanted to in during my due diligence for this conversation, there was a quote that I've taken from Phil's LinkedIn profile, and I wanted to get your take on it because I thought you might have an interesting perspective on this. And I'll read verbatim from his LinkedIn profile. He's probably going to listen to this and be like, God damn, I got to take that down. But maybe he loves it, so who knows? It says, Aussie's outstanding reputation for stable internet and sensible customer service stem from Phil's passion for putting the customer at the center of the business. And this is part I put in bold for you. His hatred for anything that resembles bullshit, and his ability to empower his staff to do their best. Now he put a little star sign next to in the shit there, but I'll include the full phrase. I wanted to know like that no BS feature of Phil, like how that might have surfaced over time, or if you can remember any moments.
Well, what are their actually documented values in the company is no bullshit. So it is one of our 5 values. So and in fact, our current advertising campaign is BF or Black Friday without the BS. So we plan it quite heavily. It's one of our core values. We live and breathe it across the organisation. You'll hear it at least once a day where someone will say, "I just had a no bullshit conversation with so and so about this," and so it has to be balanced with being respectful and all those sorts of things. But I mean, an example, a couple of examples I thought of. One was when the business was growing really, really fast. There was often the business was growing faster than they could put capacity into the network sometimes, and that led to congestion, which deteriorated the experience for customers. And so Phil stepped in to people were saying, let's sell more. Phil stepped in and basically created a rule that said, we're here for the customer. Congestion is a bullshit experience for customers. Therefore, anytime our actual utilisation exceeds 80% of our capacity in any particular location, we're issuing a stop sell, and we will sell no more to that area until we've built the capacity. And so, in his mind, it was bullshit to trade customer experience for revenue or growth. A similar one was that NBN brought out a tool where they could tell you any particular line to any particular customer was underperforming. So and they've been buying a 100 meg plan, but they can only get 40. And NBN said, we can tell you who that is. NBN's approach was that, this is just information. And Phil went, no, what we should do is call those customers and say, you shouldn't be buying a 100 meg plan, you should be buying a 50 meg plan because you can't get the full thing you're paying for. And therefore, we actually had a campaign to call those customers and tell them they were over provisioned in terms of what they were paying for. So that's the sort of real on the ground examples of no bullshit that I can think of, but it happens every day. It's a term we use all the time. It can as I said, can lead to some chunky decisions in terms of, is this really fair? Or is that bullshit? And you'll see it all the time. Are we being bullshit here, or are we being fair income? So that goes on.
It's pretty remarkable. Like, I just bring up the share price of Aussie Broadband. It's now a $1.1 billion company, according to the overlords at Google Finance. It's remarkable to think where the business has come since that moment in 2016 there, where it kind of like was reshaped. And since then, the business has also made acquisitions. And I was just curious, as like a general question, obviously given your experience and skill set, how you think about that, like what goes into the M&A strategy, just generally speaking.
Yeah. So Aussie had grown predominantly as a residential player, but there was an internal belief that we could do more for business than we were doing, and we could bring some of our skill sets to the business space at all sizes and government. And so we have our strategic retreats where we go off and cook food together and have fun, but spend a lot of time talking. And we talked about, well, what does that mean? What does it mean for us to get into business and E&G seriously? And we've been encouraged by a lot of our customers. So a lot of our residential customers would say, you should talk to my IT department. It'd be great to have you in our business. And in fact, that's what happened with Westpac. Two members of Westpac staff went to work one day and said, you should really include Aussie on the next tender for our connectivity. And just out of that simple suggestion, we've ended up providing connectivity across the entire branch network. So we're encouraged to think about business and E&G as the next phase of growth while continuing our residential growth. And we've all we'd have the added advantage of diversifying our revenue. And so we could have built that capability organically. So we could have gone and recruited and built that. But, driven by Phil, we're a pretty impatient bunch. And so instead said, let's do a scan around and see if there's anyone else out there that's already doing what we want to do and can fill those capability gaps for us. And so we identified over the wire as a potential acquisition target. We've done a bit of business with over the wire over the years. We knew Michael Ambrose or Mo through various dealings, and we knew they were importantly they were capable of what they would do. They had capability in there as we didn't, and they culturally were not dissimilar to us, which was very important to us. And so we finalised that acquisition in 2022, and then last year we acquired. Earlier this year we acquired Symbio, and so over the wire brought with their tier one voice network. So it was a real new string to our bow. Till we can sell data and voice services. And there's only 6 tier one voice networks in Australia. And so over the wire was number 6. And this year we acquired Symbio, which was number 5. So we were merged, or not merged, because we still got both networks, but we've got the 5 and 6 network in Australia for tier one voice. But it was also importantly an enablement business and software house for other telcos. And so importantly, it also had an enablement business to facilitate the growth of other companies. And so both of those acquisitions have really sort of cemented our position in the E&G and government and business space. And when we're looking at acquisition, what we're principally looking for is what capability is that entity going to bring to us that we don't already have? So how does it further our revenue diversification, skill sets, and growth capability into the future? Is it culturally aligned? Obviously, does it have reasonable results and good financials and not significant risks? And can we bring the businesses together well? And also, what growth do we see in that business in its own right, but also as part of the overall Aussie group? And obviously, we do all the usual, financial metrics. But for us, it's more about, do they fit together? Is the sum of the parts going to be bigger than the two things separately? So that's sort of the way we look at it. And we do the usual financial sort of assessments, but it's more strategy and cultural alignment that's really important to make sure the business can grow forward strongly.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about that and how the business is kind of, it took advantage of legislative structural change with like Telstra, obviously, kind of, the NBN kind of taking that slot in many ways. And then now, like, what is the next frontier for the business? Like being in businesses like ours right here in this our very office, and accessing those customers while also nurturing the base of customers. I will direct people to the Aussie Broadband website. If you haven't already compared Aussie to your own internet, like, this is not a paid endorsement in any way, but I would highly encourage anyone to go and check it out because, like I said at the top of the show, there aren't many brands, Brian, anywhere, in any industry, anywhere in the world that I would stand here and say, this is awesome. And I think you guys have done a wonderful job of activating, like firstly cultivating, then activating the community that you have as customers, which is just an outstanding success story and seeing that grow. And if you're an investor, you can check it out. You can see the company filings. You can go online and see the combined group as a whole. It's beyond just Aussie Broadband itself these days. So go and check it out, I would say. I'll include links in the show notes, of course. But Brian, one question that I ask all of our new guests on the show is more of a philosophical one, mate. It's a bit of a tricky one, which is if you could go back to a younger version of yourself, a younger Brian, and you could tell yourself one thing, money, finance, investing, life, whatever, business, doesn't matter, what would it be?
There's a couple of things spring to mind. I used to work with a business that owned a small car mine, and the mine manager was an old shrewd guy who used to like investing a lot. And he said to me, he says, just remember, Ryan, at any point in time, half the market is wrong. And that stuck with me, particularly in this role. When you've got investors who we have we have some investors telling us we should go left, and some saying we should go right, and then you've got to essentially plow your own furrow, as it were, and then make the decisions you think are right. But obviously, listen to everyone. So that's one thing that came to mind. But talking about going back to being younger me, I've got 2 daughters, one of who is prepared to listen to me, and the other one's 21. I don't have anything earth-shattering, but what I talked to her about is it's the old classic, which is the power of compound interest, timing the market, not timing the market, just get in, build wealth gradually. If you try and time it, you'll get it wrong. And I know it's not. There's no news in that. I think it's just it's repeated because it's right. I think the other thing, this is a personal reflection, and it's not always easy to achieve, but never sell property. So.
Yes, that's a truism in every suburb of Australia, it seems. So, yeah, mate, that's some great advice to end the show, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're incredibly busy. Like you even just mentioned before, bringing on 100 people in 8 weeks. Like the business is a machine these days. It's wonderful. So for anyone listening, go and check it out. Whether you're a customer or a potential investor, you can check out the filings. Brian, thanks for taking your time out today and spending it with me.
Great. Thanks, Owen. All the best.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.